Apple, HP, Motorola, then construction. What happens when a high-tech supply chain exec brings Silicon Valley speed and AI into the world of concrete and chaos? Trevor Schick helped launch the iPod. Now he's using AI to transform how buildings get built. In this episode of Construction Genius, we unpack how AI is fixing the biggest pain points in construction, from progress tracking to predicting schedule delays before they happen. Do you want to know how AI can turn your junior project engineer into a risk management expert? Stick around. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Trevor, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, AI, it's hyped. It's all over the place. It's in everything from soup to nuts, and it's in construction. So give us a little background here about yourself, how you got into the construction industry as it relates to the software, and why AI is having such a massive impact in construction at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a probably different background than most people you might talk to. I grew up on the supply chain side of the world in high tech. So I came out of school, went into companies that people have heard of. I was at Apple, Hewlett-Packard, Motorola, spent a lot of times running global supply chains for those companies. Then about 10 years ago, I started to look at doing something a bit different. And how do we take some of the learnings that we had done, especially on the supply chain and material side in the high tech industry, and start applying those to the construction industry? And so I worked for a company that was really trying to figure out that piece of it. Started with them, spent some time with that more on the multifamily side of the business, then moved over and went into the single family rental platform. So came here to Austin, worked for a company here, Amherst Holdings, which was single family, buy homes, can do the maintenance on them, and then lease them up and do the property management. And did that for a few years. Then went over to Onyx Homes, which is an offsite high-tech construction builder for single-family homes out of Florida. And, never headquartered in Texas, but then building in Texas and Florida. And it's interesting because at the time, Slate was a customer of mine. So they were doing work for us to use AI in some of the work we were doing. So I was working very closely with them as a customer. Then about a year and a half ago, I put a lot of time into, how do you take AI and really transition it and start using it in construction more heavily, and decided to come over and take over as CEO of Slate Technologies.
Okay, so I got a couple of questions here. First one is Apple to HP to Motorola. In a couple of words, describe the culture of each one of those places and the differences that you saw. I think people would be interested because they're such iconic companies.
Yeah, so it was interesting, and I'll go in order because that order is a little bit different. But so I was at Apple back in the day. For anyone who remembers the iPod, I was on the original iPod team getting that to market, which later on became the iPhone. And, that place, it was just fast-paced. Bring people in, new technologies that were, coming into play with suppliers, tons of materials that hadn't been done before. For those who remember the slot-based CD and DVD, it's just,
of course,
some of the stuff we did was crazy. I mean, the technology behind that at the time was unbelievable. I was kind of on the lead on that kind of stuff. So just all about innovation, all about driving that, but also very fast-paced. Product only lived 9 months. So pretty much you ramped as fast as you could. You put everything on the water. And by the time you loaded your last boat, you were starting to end of life that product. And so it was just a wild environment to be in. Motorola is a little bit different because I went over there when they were separating the company. There was one large company that kind of had the industrial piece, which was much more the headsets, for fire departments, police, which everyone used to see on the NFL side. Everyone wore a Motorola headset. I was on there on the cell phone side and the DVD set-top box players. And so much different culture, a little bit slower, but still on the side I was on with the phone business was very similar from the perspective of products didn't last very long. Everything you did, and this is kind of, we'll probably get into this on the construction versus technology, is every product I brought out had to be better technology, higher quality, but a lower cost. Right. And that was everything you did. Worst case, you think your iPhone, all that new technology, it's the same price. And so it's this whole mentality of you got to bring a better product to market every time, but you're not allowed to increase the price on that product. So how do you go drive out costs in the technology as you're doing it. So kind of that mindset is just ingrained in me as I got into the construction industry. Then HP, kind of same thing. It was the turnaround. I went there when Meg Whitman took over, and it was separating the company into two publicly traded companies. The PC and printers went to one side, the enterprise went to the other, and I spent 9 months tearing apart a supply chain that was very integrated, separating two separate supply chains. What I'd say at the end of the day is that company needed it, right? You couldn't value it from a Wall Street perspective as that big of company, and it also just needed to streamline. But there you got into everyone needs to agree. If you looked at the HP way, as they used to call it, decisions were hard. And it was the first time I was in a company where, I'd go do something and somebody'd say, "Oh, did Bob agree to this?" And I'd say, "I don't even know who he is. So if he calls me, I'll talk to him." But, it's slow decision making. It's what you sometimes start seeing in construction, just because it was hard to get at all the data in a business that big. And so as I kind of went over to the construction from HP, it was kind of saying, how do I take a lot of that learnings from Apple and from Motorola and kind of that pace, but apply it to something that historically hasn't moved at that kind of pace?
Very interesting. That dovetails me into another one of my questions from your background. You mentioned company, and I think I picked up the name of it, even though you didn't say it. Did you work for Katerra at some point?
I did. So when I left HP, I went to Katerra. I was there in the early days setting up the material supply chain. So as I said, my background was materials. So I went over there and helped them get the material supply chain set up, because they were doing everything by direct from manufacturing, right? Which is, again, if you think of the electronics world and the high tech world, everything we did there, we never bought through distribution, right? You bought directly. And so really setting up those relationships in the global supply chain there for, I was there 2.5 years, kind of in the earlier days of the company.
Yep.
And left in 2019. Obviously as COVID hit, they had their troubles, which unfortunately, they had a lot of great people and a lot of great technologies, but they went into bankruptcy, I think in 2021, if I remember right. But it was a couple of years after I'd left.
Yeah, I interviewed someone who used to work there for the podcast, and it was very interesting. It's interesting because people can look at Katerra and kind of laugh at them in a certain way, right? Look at those guys. They spent a bunch of money and screwed it up. This is construction, don't you know? We can never run construction like a factory and sort of point fingers. But what do you think is the enduring takeaway from Katerra's attempt that you think will last in terms of construction and really help industry to move forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the offsite piece of construction is continuing to grow. And I think globally on this, you go over to a lot of the other markets around the world and very much pushing the offsite construction piece of this, right? And it's just, you can't do all this stuff downtown. So I do believe a lot of those are getting continue to get driven. And you see a lot of the big general contractors now that have their they're trying to do more and more of this. And so I do believe that's a big piece of it. I do think streamline the material supply chain, as we all know during COVID. And it wasn't just construction, it was across the industries. Supply chain, my world, most of the time, I was never the guy that was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, right? It was always talking about sales engineering. That was the critical part, until people realize that it is a supply chain that's really, your product gets built because your supply chain works. And when there's disruptions in that, and when you think about construction specifically, if you're the general contractor, you're dealing with a subcontractor. That subcontractor is dealing with a distributor. That distributor might be dealing with a pro rep or with the factory. But as a general contractor, you're 3 to 4 steps away from what's really happening with your materials, right? Yeah. And this is, leads into part of what we do at Slate, because it is hard to understand that when somebody says, "Hey, 6 months from now, I'm going to go build this. Is my drywall going to be here?" You just don't have the insight you do in other industries to know what's going on with the materials. And so I think there's a lot of pieces, and I actually look at where people from Katerra went, and it's great to see them in places that are doing offsite construction. I can think of guys down at companies that are doing a lot of good things that are offsite, and a lot of the people from Katerra out there are still driving that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's get into the heart of our conversation here. Where do you think AI is most useful in the construction industry at the moment as it stands, like as a tool that I could use today?
Yeah, I think that where you saw a lot of it up front was kind of safety side of things. And obviously safety on job sites is critical. Where you can have cameras set up, those cameras can, make sure that it's hard for people to be on site and see what's happening all the time. And so materials are getting put down and they're not capping off the top of the rebars. You're able to see that all the way to then that AI not only being the camera, but then able to say, "Hey, I'm looking at this picture. I've seen other pictures like that have caused a safety issue." And being able to then go, highlight that there could be safety problems. And obviously safety is critical in construction. So it was a good starting point to go do that. It also then leads into things like progress reporting, right? Which is, as you start looking at that site, and it's one of the tools we have as part of Slate, being able to use, whether it's photographs or manual, somebody walking through, kind of highlighting it on a BIM model, what's been completed. Because again, a lot of that these days is, I think I'm about 70% done. That then goes through and rolls all the way through your billings. And, you find out later that you really weren't 70% of the way done. And so, I think on that progress reporting piece, there's a lot of good technologies that are starting to go out there. But I also think we're just scratching the surface, right?
Yeah.
The data is so vast in construction, right? And it's cut across so many siloed pieces of the software stack that the stuff we're doing is good. It's a good start. But it's really the critical piece to make this happen and be successful with AI in this business is to really be able to start pulling all those pieces together so that you can look and say, is there going to be a problem in my schedule? And it's not just looking at P6 and looking at the schedule, but it's looking at what's happening in Procore with the RFIs. It's looking at BIM 360 of what approvals are still, bringing all those pieces together. And that's really where the next phase is coming for AI in construction.
Think about the last time you promoted someone into a leadership role and it failed. Why did it fail? I can tell you one reason. People know how to build projects, but they don't know how to build and lead teams of people. Construction comes with its challenges that only insiders truly understand. Generic leadership training doesn't cut it. You need a program to train your leaders built specifically for construction professionals led by an industry expert. And my online course, The Shift, is exactly that course. It has 5 modules. It'll teach your people how to control their calendars and reduce stress and embrace chaos and accomplish their critical tasks. It will teach them the 3 essential messages they have to communicate every day in order to motivate and lead their team effectively. It'll show them how to build and lead a high-performing team. Give them a framework for running effective meetings so they'll be able to solve problems in less than an hour, and also give them a higher perspective on their leadership that will enable them to work on the business and on their teams and not get stuck in the weeds micromanaging. So go out to my website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, read all about the course, and then enroll yourself and your leaders in the course, and I guarantee that it will transform your leadership. If it does not, you take the whole course and you didn't get benefit from it, you just send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will cheerfully refund you 100% of your money. I'm really confident this course will transform your leadership. So again, go out to the website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn more about the course, and start taking it today. Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because we have in construction a vast amount of data. I think one of the key elements of successful AI implementation is obviously the quality of the data that is being queried, because if I have garbage in, obviously I'm going to get garbage out. And then you mentioned the silos across the industry. And so this is a problem that every technologist looking at the industry seeks to solve. From your perspective, how can AI transform real-time construction data into actionable insights that enhance cost efficiency and address some of that risk management issue?
Yeah, and so, I think the important part is the tools that are in the industry are good, right? P6 is a very strong tool, right, from a scheduling perspective. And Procore has done a great job of, what they've done in the market. It's just the amount of the market they've picked up is fantastic, right? It's just a good business they've built. What I look at is now what AI brings to the table is linking that data together. So creating large language models, which are critical to kind of the base of this, and then using agentic AI to take those models and be able to auto-link the data is what becomes critical. And so that's, with Slate, that's where we started. How do I bring in data from multiple different silos, be able to auto-link that together so it all ties to the schedule, right? So when I go look at an item in the schedule, like install of windows, if I need to know what rev of the window am I on, I don't have to go to another system to look that up. That data is already linked together. If I need to know what's the cost or potential cost impact on it, I know that. I can also then start looking and saying, is there a task before that window install that has to happen that has a potential delay to it? What happens in construction is you kind of get these compounding delays, right? One thing slows down and suddenly your drywall is not ready for the window install. Now your window installers show up and they can't work because they're waiting on the task before that. And so really being able to kind of start looking ahead and being able to link those different things together. I can look today and say, you're supposed to start your windows on Monday, but you have 2 open RFIs that'll stop that from happening. Based on those RFIs, and I'm looking back at history of your data, it's going to take you 5 days to get those closed. You either need to really jump on those and get them closed, or start rescheduling your subtasks. Otherwise, you're going to have people standing around waiting that without something to do. And so it really, to me, is about taking these silos, getting the auto linking. And then the other piece that I think is critical to this is what we call the lessons learned side of it, right? Because I've been around this industry, I've built some stuff. And at the end of every project, you do a lessons learned, right? You usually write down a bunch of things that you could have done better, and it usually goes into a drawer. And there's no systematic way to capture those things and apply them to the next set of projects. What we do at Slate is my first thing when I bring a customer on board is I ingest 10 old projects that they did. And I start looking and saying, okay, these are where all your problems happened. And I can do that all the way during the project itself, but also then start looking at warranty, right?
So are you taking their information from P6 and Procore? You're asking for all of that from previous projects?
We are. And when I say asking for it, it's a very simple connection, right? So you go into Slate. As long as they've given us access, I can log into P6 through Slate. I can log into Procore, to log into Builder. And so really when I say they give us access to it, and then we can go in and get the data for the projects they've allowed us to use, given us permission to use, and then we can pull that in and run that lessons learned on that previous data. And then
so what you're doing there, if I may ask, Trevor, what you're doing there is, in effect, you're building that client's personal large language model. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say we start with a large language model that's general, that kind of we cut across the industry, but then you nailed it, which is specific to them. They might call, framing something different than all the other guys do. And so we do need to go in and then run it specific to them. And it's really training of the model, right? So the hope is before I even run theirs in there, my LLM covers 70% of the stuff, right? Yeah. We've done a good job, and that'll continue to get better. But then I need to train it specific to their data. And to be honest, if I'm at 70% in the first project I bring in, once I go in and do the training on that first project, I'm in the mid-90s on the next one. So it really only takes about one cycle where we need some of their help to do that model. But once we get one or two projects in there, it's linking up mid-90s to high 90% connections.
Let me ask you a question. So assuming you have a quality LLM, the next aspect of using AI effectively, from my understanding, is then the quality of the prompter, so to speak, and the understanding of the prompter. And as you're talking about using your system where you're pulling in information from different silos of the construction project, how are you advising your clients in terms of how they're using your tool to get the most out of it? Are you advising them to train one person as sort of the prompt genius? Are you saying bring in someone from estimating, someone from project management? How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a little different. So when you call it the prompt, we do have, a conversational AI chat, right? Where you can go in and ask it questions and it goes. But that is very simple. What we're actually doing as a tool is you don't need to be the expert. What we're doing is linking the data together, coming back and saying, here's the insights. Here's what's, your potential issues are in these areas. And then we actually are using generative AI to go back and say, here's what you can do to fix those. Right. And I'm a firm believer, right? And this isn't AI's taking over the world, right? We have very smart people in construction that have seen it all. What I'm trying to do is solve the 70, 80% of the problems that we've seen before that we can go fix easily. And that way you can get to the people that are these really smart people who have been doing this for 30 years. They can put their focus on the hard problems, right? And then, by the way, the next time that hard problem comes along and they tell the system what needs to be done, we actually then bring that back in, and that's your machine learning. So next time it comes up, it says, hey, last time you saw this problem, this is a way to go resolve that. And so it is a learning tool. There's the human touch. We definitely think about this as I can handle a lot of what's happening on the project site when I look at the data. But there's also a piece of this where we want the human touch to make sure they're looking at it.
So if I'm understanding you rightly, one of the benefits of using a tool like yours is that it not only enhances potentially your most sophisticated users, but let's say you have an entry-level project engineer
Absolutely
who knows how to use your tool, then perhaps it takes some of the burden off of the project manager or project executive and makes the project engineer more effective.
It does. And we think of it as persona-based. And so it's also different people get different messages, right? So we have three main personas, but you can set up more than that. And ours are kind of set up as the executive, right? So the executive, what do they care about? What is my project? Is it on schedule? If I have 10 projects going on in the system, what are the ones I need to worry about? And what are my cost risks on those? And so we're able to pull that from the data of, hey, you have schedule risk here, or you have cost overruns in this area. Give them the high level on the project. We then have a scheduler persona, and that's much more focused on, hey, over the next month, what are the risks to my schedule? And then start giving recommendations on what could be done to mitigate those risks. And then the final one is the field team, right? They're the guys who are literally going into the office every day, and this kind of ties to your statement, and saying, there's always problems on a construction site, right? It's part of what we live with. And so the idea is if they have 100 problems, what are the 5 most important ones that are going to impact the schedule and the cost that they should focus on first? And so literally when they come in the morning, it is your wake up that says overnight, here's what we've seen. Here's what you need to focus on to start today. And then obviously they can work their way down the list, but tying that all back to biggest schedule impact and biggest cost impact to the project and making sure they're prioritizing it. Because you probably know this, people get a phone call and somebody needs something done and they might go use 2 hours trying to fix that problem. That problem might have zero impact on the schedule. And so we're trying to be able that one that can prioritize what it is with not only telling them what the problem is, but then also give them the recommendation on what they need to do to potentially fix it.
That's really cool. It's interesting because one of the insights that I've been learning in terms of my use of AI is seeing it not as a tool, but as a partner and treating it that way. And so when you have those recommendations coming, it's almost as if you're tapping into this wise old head, assuming the information in the AI is correct. And someone junior can really partner up with them and it can really enhance that person's capabilities.
It does. And that's where I go back to. It's like, let's take the easy ones to solve. Either give them to people lower down or just solve them, right? Some of them, you don't need it per people's intervention. And then for those, the guys, project execs, the people who've been in this for a long time, those are the ones where you want to make sure, to your point, you partner with them on what can be done to fix these problems. And what's interesting about it is because then I say one of the things we've become very focused on is, and then going all the way through to warranty, right? There's so much cost that happens in warranty that we want to look at that. And so when you start your next project in pre-construction, you might pick a subcontractor. We're going to tell you before that project even starts, you had a problem with that subcontractor on the warranty side of things in the past. Or you've had a problem with that subcontractor in schedule, right? He was 6 months late. Maybe you only put in, flow to 5 days. And I'm going to tell you that he's always 14 days late. So you can do one of two things from a recommendation side. Here's the other subcontractors in that group in your vendor base. You can pick one of them and here's their timing. Or you better redo your schedule and put more float on top of that. And so what we're trying to do is take it all the way from the end of the project and then in pre-construction, start applying these learnings so that you're attacking them before the problems even happen in the field. And then, as I said, there's always going to be problems in the field, but hopefully you can get rid of some of those before they even happen.
I like that. This may be a dumb question, but this persona approach,
Yep.
How did you come to that insight? Because maybe it's obvious, but I like that insight. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it was one of our customers who just said, well, wait a minute, you guys are giving us these insights and our executive team gets them and they don't care that you need to do these very low level tasks. What they want to know is we have 15 projects that are inside of Slate. Which of the project execs should I be calling today? Right? Where do I need to put my focus? And so really started to play off of that. And then, as I said, we've had other customers who actually want another persona set up and we can set it up within Slate. It's kind of a variable. Those are the 3 we do out of the box, but it's really customer driven. That's, the good news of being a startup is we worked with a set of customers to begin with. They gave us some great ideas of what their real world problems were. And just like most things, a lot of those apply to everyone. And those that don't, we're just a very customer centric org. We can figure out how to make it work for everyone.
All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. Over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview. Obviously, in your role, I know you emphasize this with your clients, the quality of the data is vital. Procore, you mentioned P6, and you're getting your data from these sources. What, in your experience working with your construction clients, what are their best practices for making sure the data that they're giving you and that you're sourcing is good data?
I mean, we deal with kind of many different kind of flows from different companies. I mean, some companies are very rigid where every project's set up the same way. They drive that. Now, to be fair, that's the easiest thing for not just our AI, but really across the business, right? If you're going to line that all of your construction codes are kind of thought about in the same way, you're doing the same levels underneath them, it makes life easier. What we've had to do as Slate, though, is also say, we know that's not always going to be true, right? And so one of the things we do is almost a data sanity check. So when data comes in, we'll give feedback on, hey, we found these loose tasks, right? These tasks don't have it's a parent-child relationship and there's no parent to it. And we actually, one of the first things we'll do when we bring customer data is give them some feedback on, hey, here's what we've seen as industry best practices. Here's some ideas that you could do, going forward with the data. But then our AI engine gets pretty good at being able to link that data regardless. And then you build it into your LLM, right? Which says, hey, sometimes this framing is called wall studs, right? And the next time it sees it, it's learned that, it's able to handle it. But we do have this kind of data scrub that we do the minute we start with a new customer and give them feedback on it.
What do you think is the one area that AI is not being employed in construction at the moment that if it was, it would have the biggest positive impact?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a couple areas, right? One is, the pre-construction piece and scheduling. Historically, you built a schedule out and it was pretty dynamic, right? There's a lot of things that go into building that out. And it's hard to kind of come up with different models to that. And there's a lot of companies working on this. So I don't want to minimize it. I just don't think it's ingrained enough in the industry. Is how do you optimize that around different variables, right? So somebody could come in and say to you, you know what, I'm losing X number of dollars per day if I don't get this storm set up on time, right? And normally this is then handled in penalty clauses where people have to then go to court afterwards and try to figure it out. And what we're trying to do is say, you can rerun these schedules on any variable and run them 100 times and say, what's my best fit, right? So if somebody says, I want to optimize on schedule, I don't care about dollars, or I want to optimize on schedule, but I'll give up to 15% increase, being able to run multiple models like that. And in the past, it just took too much human effort to go do it, right? You have to bring people in the room, you do these war rooms trying to figure it out. Now with AI, you can load that in and say, go run me 100 simulations overnight and come back with my best fit to what that simulation is that meets my customer requirement. Once we agree to it, then go back and redo the schedule to support that. And I think that's an area that, there's so much time in these projects spent trying to figure out how do we solve to one variable. That's what AI does, right? It takes large amounts of data that is too much for humans to handle and puts it into models where you can run multiple simulations to come back with an answer. I think that's one big piece of it. The other big piece I see, and there's some of this going in, it's part of our core to our tool, is use a much more computational design when you're designing these projects, right? Build out the building blocks of a project. So here's what a room looks like. Here's what a bathroom looks like, the different components. And then really when you go in, you could say, and we're doing this for one of our customers today, here's a piece of land. They're a single family home builder. What is the optimal ROI I could get? Like what homes did I build on this lot, right? And we can start going back and saying, here's different layouts. Here's what your ROI would be. Here's what your time would be. And be able to run multiple scenarios on the best way to go build that for the highest profit. And it allows you to go do that computational design up front versus a drafter doing it. Somebody's saying, hey, I want to change these 5 things. Now you got to redo your estimate, redo your schedule, come back. It just takes weeks to get this stuff done. With AI, you can come in and literally in our model, you could sit there and say, you know what? I used to want to say I'm going to have 50-foot lots in this. I'm now going to do 40-foot lots. 3 minutes later, I'm going to give you what the difference is there. How many homes can you put out? What's your difference in ROI? And that's what AI gets you, right? This, the power of the computer that we're at today, you can run these things in minutes. And then I can give you your new estimate. I can give you your new schedule and I give you the new layout all in that same piece. And we're doing this real time today with some pretty big customers.
That's interesting. So earlier when you were talking about your experience at Apple, you were talking about how each product had to have better tech, higher quality, lower cost, right? Yeah. So let's take out the better tech part on a construction project, maybe replace that with the speed or the schedule. Yeah. So speed, quality, cost. And typically let's say I'm the person buying your construction services, you might say to me, well, you can have 2 of the 3, right?
That's the normal answer. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? But from what I'm hearing from you, your thesis or your approach is that we can impact each one of those with the right application of AI. So we can get better scheduling, we can get better quality and lower costs if we have the right information and then we're using that information intelligently.
Exactly. And the data's out there, right? And you'll see different ones, right? every other industry, their productivity increases, right? Everyone sees these charts. Construction is the only industry where productivity is either flat to down over the past 50 years, which is why it's almost the opposite of the electronics industry, right? Most projects you see today cost more to do, and the schedule's longer than they used to be. Now, I don't want to minimize it. Some of that's regulatory. So let's kind of take a piece of that that says that. But it also just, the incentive system in construction is so different, right? Which is everything's a cost plus model going into it. And so we firmly believe you need to take that step back and say, I got to get away from, a subcontractor giving information to the general contractor, them giving the information to the developer. And every one of those steps along the value chain, people are, massaging the data. What we're trying to do is get that into one centralized database where you can then go run it and say, 30% of people's time today is spent trying to find data in construction, right? I mean, that's a crazy number. And that's where you can leverage AI, you can leverage these models to go in and get at that information in real time, where somebody doesn't know, somebody new coming into the industry doesn't need to know, I need to go into my ERP system to get the cost for this. And then I need to go into BIM 360 to get the rev that I'm on for that. Or I need to go into P6 to get the schedule. Why can't that person just go into a chatbot and ask that question and then immediately get the data back? And that's exactly what we can do for them in Slate is, one, the data is easy to get at, and then they can say in our chatbot, tell me my 3 biggest problems on this project, right? And it's going to tell them the 3 biggest problems. And then it tells them, this is where you start just ranking what you should be working on today to minimize schedule impacts and minimize your cost overruns.
So who's your ideal client right now?
Yeah, so our ICP, right, the ideal client for us right now is it's usually the larger general contractors, and I'll call it more of the ECPs, right, the guys who are doing engineering and construction, because really, our tool can start all the way up front in the pre-con phase, like I talked about, and doing computational design for the design piece. And so really, when we think about our ideal customer, I use computational design to design the project. I then use project intelligence, which is what we call it, that then gives you your insights and your recommendations during the build process. And then our final one we call Slate Progress, and that is actually our progress reporting tool, where you can actually download your BIM 360 model into a lightweight one on an iPad, go into the room, and rather than just your subcontractor saying, I'm 20% done, he actually goes in, touches the lines on the BIM 360 model of what's been completed. It takes a picture of it. And now when you're doing progress reporting, it's true progress reporting. The next step to that, as you can probably figure, is then you use a camera or use goggles. So when you walk in, you don't need to touch it. Technology is not quite there yet. We're not far, but it's not quite there yet. But really then allows you to kind of go through the project lifecycle. Then all the things that happen on your progress reporting, where you're slower, where you might have cost overrun on things, we feed that back into the computational design. So next time that we use that to generate the building, we actually take the lessons learned from that last project and build them back into it. And that's just something it is so hard to do if you don't have a tool that can sit on top of all these different pieces of software and align to bring you those insights.
Okay, cool. And how can people get in touch with you, Trevor?
So slate.ai is the website. We got a great set of customer success teams that loves to get out, show people what we're doing, and figure out whether we have a solution for some of the problems people are dealing with.
Awesome. You just recently moved to Austin. You were telling me offline. So in Austin, Texas, what's the one restaurant I should hit if I'm coming in from California?
Wow. That's you might start a fight among people in Austin with that one. I'm a steak guy, even though I so new to Texas, but still love my steak. And so Jeffrey's down in Austin is my favorite steakhouse.
All right. We'll have a link in the show notes to Jeffrey's in Austin next time you're in Austin.
There you go.
And you want a good steak? I think that Trevor is going to recommend that for you. So we'll have that in the show notes. Trevor, I do appreciate you coming on Construction Genius, giving us your insights here today. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. It's fun to do it. We'll talk soon.
Right on. Thank you for listening to today's conversation with Dan. Again, mantherapy.org, preventconstructionsuicide.com, and then also Clayco's report on breaking the silence and mental health. All of those links are in the show notes, along with the Sugar Fire Smokehouse for a little barbecue next time you're in St. Louis. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius today. Share this interview with anyone who you think would benefit from listening to it, and also give us a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. We'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.